No tanker strike has yet been called, but demand for fuel has soared, prompting long queues and mounting shortages. The Petrol Retailers Association has blamed the panic buying on government advice to keep tanks topped up and the much criticised call to fill up jerry cans. Here's David Marsland.
Whether panic buying or just taking sensible precautions, drivers have been cramming onto forecourts for fuel. In Dunfermline, staff were keeping the lines in order. Police in England have had to shut some stations down. Petrol sales are up 81% across Britain, diesel 43%, and it's all over a strike that might never happen.
The reason why people are concerned about fuel supplies is because we have a trade union that is threatening a strike that is potentially going to disrupt those fuel supplies, and the government has a responsibility to everyone in this country to take sensible contingency plans.
It's those plans, though, that some claim are the real cause of the problem. Cabinet Office Minister Francis Maud's advice to fill up a jerry can and keep it in the garage has been condemned. The AA called it the height of irresponsibility. The Fire Brigade Union said it was dangerous. That advice has now been withdrawn and replaced by a new message from the Energy Secretary.
People have about a third of their tank full at any one time, and if we could increase that, maybe double that to 2/3, that would give the whole country more resilience against this completely wrong strike.
The Scottish Government is calling for calm.
The priority is surely preventing a strike, not issuing unwise advice about jerry cans. I think more government preparation is what's required to promote calm and orderly behaviour in the population at large.
The Scottish Government held its own resilience meeting this afternoon, and Finance Secretary Johnstone was at a COBRA meeting called by the Prime Minister in London this morning. Steps being taken include the Army training drivers to carry out deliveries. On Monday, the Unite Union will meet with the tanker firms it's in dispute with, both sides under pressure to make peace. The union claims increased competition seen safety standards driven down along with wages and pensions. The employers say staff can earn £45,000 a year. Many have final salary pensions, and safety is paramount. If a strike is held, the union will have to give 7 days' notice, but the conciliation service ACAS is now involved with hopes action can be averted.
Really unnecessary strike. These are not people who are not badly paid. There's absolutely no case for a strike, and we'll do everything we can to prevent it, but in the end, plan for every eventuality. That is the job of government.
I think they've presided over complete shambles and chaos, and I think the people of Britain are having to queue at petrol stations. There was no strike date set.
Suppliers insist there is no fuel shortage, so no need to queue. What might be harder to find are jerry cans. Retailer Halford says sales are up 467%.
David Marsland there. Well, to discuss some of the issues surrounding the fuel crisis, here with me in the studio is the broadcaster and motoring journalist Alan Douglas and the co-leader of the Scottish Green Party, Patrick Harvie. And joining us from Aberdeen is the Scottish Conservatives transport spokesman, Alex Johnstone. Alex Johnstone, no strike, but the Conservative-led government has created exactly what it was trying to avoid, a fuel crisis.
I think that's an exaggeration. I'm well aware that there was shortages of fuel in the northeast of Scotland in some areas as early as Tuesday, and that was actually before Francis Maud had made any of his comments. I think what we're seeing is the genuine reaction of motorists who are used to difficulties in the fuel supply, who have seen pickets on the gates of the Grangemouth refinery year after year, and who now know how to behave when it looks like there's a fuel shortage coming. This is it.
But there's at least 7 days, if not more, until there is a possible strike. Has the government not acted too soon?
I think what we saw was that people started to react the moment the union had balloted for strike action. I think that's what began the panic, and the fact that the government are now giving advice to people to make sure that they don't allow their tanks to go empty and perhaps store some fuel if you have the opportunity to do that in a safe and legal way is simply sound advice.
Alan Douglas, have you been queuing up in the forecourt?
No, fortunately, I haven't, but I have seen lots of queues. I just don't understand what's going on here. I think it's understandable that people are panic buying. They're going there because, well, for a start, there's a queue, so there must be something worth having. So, people join the queue. But I think apart from that, they are worried that they don't want to be last in line. And I think the way the government has handled things this week has been incredibly cack-handed. In fact, trying to understand what the politics are is very difficult. But I think there's something along the lines of they're looking for the motorists to provide the backup, the resilience that we've heard about, in the case of fuel supplies running out. And as we heard in the report, a third or 3 times the amount that's stored in filling stations can be stored in people's petrol tanks. So in other words, you have a whole country full of cars, full of fuel, you've got a huge stockpile there, more than you would have in the filling stations.
Alex Johnstone, Francis Maw talking about filling up the jerry cans. Was that not irresponsible? I mean, that industry is delighted because the sale of jerry cans has gone up 400%.
I don't think it is irresponsible. I think it's important that people do make provision wherever they can in a safe and legal way. And in spite of some of the things that have been said by some people who have tried to influence this argument, it is safe and legal to store fuel in an approved container. And many people who have chosen to do that are simply looking after their own interests.
Patrick Harvie, is it not sensible for the government to take precautions with a potential strike looming?
Well, it would be sensible for the government to take precautions instead of stoking people's fears. That would be a sensible approach, but that's not what we've seen happening. There is a longer-term issue at stake here, though, both with the potential dispute here. And remember, it's a dispute over terms and conditions, not pay. Some quite reasonable expectations about the drivers having a forum to discuss their concerns, for example. I see no reason why the industry can't accede to those requests. But a potential dispute over the transport of fuel around the country at a time when we know that industry is going to contract. Whether it's because of arguments I might look to put forward over reducing demand for road space, or actually probably more likely the transition toward electric vehicles, there is going to be less need to move fuel around the country. And in 10 or 15 years' time, we're going to see a radical contraction of this particular industry. I don't see either the industry or the government, or I'm afraid to say even the unions, talking seriously about managing that contraction in a responsible way and in a way that does respect drivers' terms and conditions.
Do you agree with that, Alan?
The electric issue. Okay, everybody switches to electric cars and then the power workers go on strike, or there are restrictions put on power supply, or the prices go up. It doesn't matter. In this case, it's petrol we're talking about, but it doesn't matter what the fuel is. The motorist is often held hostage by the authorities, whether commercial hostages or political hostages. And I think this is what's happening here. I think it's understandable. People are very worried. They're anxious.
But Alan,
and the politicians are doing nothing to help.
But Alan, if you want to avoid further disputes, even in terms of moving fuel around the country over the next 10 or 15 years, that contraction of that industry is going to have to be negotiated on all sides so that the drivers and the union representatives accept what's happening.
I agree there are huge issues as far as the filling station issue is concerned. The number of filling stations have contracted dramatically, and that's part of what the problem is about now. But I agree that the drivers may or may not have a legitimate case, but that's not the immediate problem. The immediate problem is how we get
Alex Johnstone, what's your response to that?
I think it's absolutely essential that whatever we do, short, medium or long term, that it doesn't get settled through strike action. I think there's an important opportunity here for the unions to talk to the employers and to find a course through this that doesn't actually penalise the motorist at the end of the day. It's very easy to do. Let's get people talking round the table.
Well, all workers do have the right to take industrial action, and I think the responsible thing, given the quite reasonable requests of the unions, is for the industry to start talking about meeting those requests.
Okay, it's
but
all very well.
Motorists and individual have the right to do their own, take care of their own responsibilities, and that's what they're doing.
Alan Douglas, it's all very well to criticise. What should the government be doing?
Well, I don't think they should be encouraging the scare tactics or the panic buying that's come along, which is what has happened.
Absolutely.
There is no There is no shortage. They're not on strike. Even if they went on strike, it would be at least another 2 weeks before anything happened. And even, if everybody goes around with a full tank of fuel, then there's something like 2 weeks of supply just on people's fuel tanks, never mind what's in the filling stations. So even if they went on strike tomorrow, there would still be about 4 weeks supply in the country, either in people's fuel tanks or in the filling stations. It's nonsense. It's understandable what's happening on the part of the motorist because they're worried. And I think the politicians have, as I say, gone about this in an incredibly cack-handed way.
Does this highlight how dependent we are on cars? Alex Johnstone?
Yes, we are very dependent on cars, especially in the rural areas of a place like Scotland, where you can't get anywhere unless you've got your own transport. But I have to say that Alan is perfectly right. Everyone's buying more fuel this week, but nobody's burning any more. So as a result, the panic will die very quickly.
Too many cars, too many people with too many cars?
Well, clearly we are too heavily dependent on fossil fuels. Both this incident, this situation, and the gas leak in the North Sea, both signals, I think, of our continuing dependence on fossil fuels. We know this has to change, whether because of climate change or because of reduction in supply and increasing cost of those fossil fuels over the coming years. So we need to negotiate what that change means for our society, for our economy, and for groups of workers as well. It has to be a transition that takes place, but it has to be a just transition too.
Alan, do you see this panic buying continuing, or do you think people are going to kind of calm down?
It can't continue. Your fuel tank only has a certain capacity, and once it's full, it's full.
Yeah, but people will then run out, and then are they going to start queuing up again?
Are people going to start driving more because they've got a full tank? Fuel is still incredibly expensive. People are already more conscious of how much fuel they're using. I think if there is one positive thing that's going to come from this, it is the fact that people become more aware of just what a limited life or lifespan there is in fossil fuels.
Absolutely.
It's a limited resource.
Alex Johnstone, it's not been a great week for the Conservatives, has it? You've had your troubles, there's been granny tax, cash for access, Pastygate, and now this.
I think it's been a very messy week for politicians right across the board. And
well,
any of these
particularly
issues
for the Conservatives.
I think there is plenty of evidence that there are other people who are having similar problems. I think any government that has to deal with the problems this government has had to deal with since it came to office a couple of years ago will mean that they have to work very hard and do some dirty deeds. And I think this is one of these difficult weeks. But they're doing the right thing, they will achieve their objective, and at the end of the day we'll be nearer the day when we can pay back part of this national debt.
Frankly, the Tories should be grateful that Greg's drivers aren't striking as well. That really would grind the country to a standstill.
I personally am very grateful for that.
Excellent, gentlemen.